All right. Well, Bobby, again, just appreciate you getting on here. Obviously, we've talked to Ryan, we talked to Chandler back in winter break, and just the impact that you've had on those two guys, and really by virtue of knowing Ryan, the impact that you've had on me, kind of I can't overstate that enough, and just being around you always makes me leave in with more questions than probably I go into that I even think I need to be wondering about. So I'm sure this conversation will be the same. But like I said, appreciate you doing this, and just happy to to stay in touch with you and have you kind of in my coaching network, and looking forward to having those on the call kind of hear from you, because I think Tyler Shorter probably knows you, Brooke probably knows who you are, but the other Tyler and Noah don't know who you are. So go ahead and just start off with what your title is, what your job description and your responsibilities are at Cal.
So, head strength and conditioning coach, I suppose. Those change so often. I oftentimes wonder what I am as well. Performance enhancement or strength conditioning. I think they all sort of hold different implications. But within all of that, I oversee all of our 19 sports here. I share that with Chandler. I say oversee. I suppose I would just be the fall guy if something were to go wrong. I think Chandler does a fantastic job with managing himself and all of his athletes. So outside of that, my sharing is like my largest team is the track and field. And then I do cross country, swimming, women's soccer, men's and women's basketball, volleyball, and I believe that's it. And then I oversee golf. Our graduate assistants run golf. This is my second half of my 17th year, so I'll be hitting 18 in January, which is as you were talking about your daughter, which is wild. That the years just go by so quickly, like semester by semester. Outside of that, as you can imagine, like from a head coach's perspective in terms of running camps and purchasing and organization and supplying and providing visions for the movement of the program, as well as upgrading facilities and just the overall direction of everything would fall into all of my responsibilities.
Yeah, so obviously, for those that are familiar with what we do here, kind of very similar to my role here. We do things a little different here with the idea of, just because of our schedules and honestly the way the GA situation works, and I don't have an actual assistant, I just have the GAs and then kind of paid intern positions. Like, we don't do straight up just full team responsibilities where like we kind of do more of like a semi-private kind of open gym format a lot of the times, and then just the teams that are here, you might get stuck coaching those for one semester, and then the next semester they might be on different days, you might not see them. So it's kind of a little bit differently. But just, can you kind of give us like an outline of maybe how you've decided like what teams are best fit for certain GAs? And really, I guess actually let me back up. So you have Chandler, and then how many GAs, interns, paid assistants, what's that look like? And then how do you, from the head coaching position, how do you kind of decide what teams and coaches or what teams and athletes certain coaches should be working with?
Yeah. Before I get to that, I'd just like to throw a plug to IUP. If anyone's looking, IUP is looking for an assistant coach. I'm not so much sure about the paid, but I know there is free housing, free food, stipend, etc. So if anyone's interested in that, or of anybody. But getting back to it, I have assistant coach, so full-time assistant, which is Chandler. And then we typically hold 2 graduate assistants, 1 to 2 interns, which are academic based. So it's more on a needs basis on the student athlete, or I'm sorry, on the student who's looking for it. It's not a position that I've really had to advertise in my tenure. Neither have I had to do the GAs. It's typically been a word to mouth. And then we have a few student workers. It's sort of like a feeder. So we'll get a student athlete that's like, hey, I'm interested in this. So they'll come and do some time with us, just shadowing, kind of cleaning, doing some grunt work. And then we typically don't want them as GAs for the most. We try to push them off onto, other people to get new experiences, whether it be yourself or Ryan or Brian, you know, someone else out in the network. You know, we try to encourage them learning from someone else. As far as like the divvying up goes, for Chandler and I, we try to have each a big squad. In my case, it would be track, and his would be football. And then we try to have them on opposite seasons. You know, so now the summer is kind of like my downtime. And as you're aware, like track is going to go from August when we get back all the way until May. You know, we have traditionally national competitors, so I'm working until the second week in May. Whereas on the football side, you know, Chandler's started last week with football, and he's going to roll all the way through Thanksgiving. And then that gives him the month of December more or less off, where I'm in with swimming, I'm in with track, you know, so we kind of flip the seasons. As far as our GAs, we try to do our best that if it should happen to have been a former athlete, we want them with a team that they're completely unfamiliar with or in a situation that they're unfamiliar with. And then the second semester of their graduate assistantship, we try to shift them over to a team that we think would be challenging for them, and they would head that team for the most part. Outside, you know, outside of like maybe our high level teams, at least in that building period. Exceptions would be maybe men's and women's basketball when we have our postseason, which is typically around a 2 to 3 week range, you know, because again, we're traditionally going deep into the playoffs. So after that 2 weeks NCAA time off and trying to squeeze them in between finals, it's usually like a 2 to 3 week period. And then it's going to be very GPP. So we would invite, you know, graduate assistants to be like, hey, you guys can head up this program and we'll kind of step back. And it's a nice break for the athletes. And it's also a nice opportunity for them to maybe get into a little bit more of a higher level, higher expectation team.
Um, you mentioned it's funny because one of the coaches on here just talked about he said that you're flexing because Tyler just sent it in the group chat. He said that you're flexing because you said how Cal typically goes deep into the playoffs in certain sports, and you guys are usually postseason advocates and a lot of the sports that you're in. So
Yeah,
that's actually interesting because one of the questions I was going to ask you, and this is further down the list, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. So what do you think? I mean, obviously, talent is skill set is first and foremost. But just in the 17 and a half years that you've been at Cal, like from top to bottom, from administration all the way down to coaches, all the way down to interns, all the way down to the athletes that you're getting, like what do you think has been kind of some of the underlying things that the whatever it is that the you know, the pieces that have made Cal successful at football, at basketballs. I mean, you guys have won a national championship. You can brag on us on some of the things that you guys had because I know you guys have won a natty in basketball. I know has football won a national championship or been close to it?
No, they had a three-peat of semifinals.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I know
Yeah.
you guys have been competitive in the last, so like I said, 17 and a half years. What has been some of the, you know, the underlying things that go into having a successful athletic program from a strength and conditioning perspective?
The athletes. Yeah, you know, it's I think that their genetic makeup and then plus their drive to fulfill potential really are the two things. And I think within the strength conditioning, then we become this integral piece to their success. Whereas minus those two things, it simply doesn't matter. I think we can all attest to that. I think we all know that inherently. I don't know that we all want to admit that. I think we want to have a little bit more impact or control. And I'm sure you've had as well athletes who just were incredible at what they do and who just couldn't care less about strength conditioning, and then the vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, athletes who are incredible in the weight room or who just should probably choose a different sport like CrossFit or something, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things, and that's again, you talk to some of the coaches here, like the sports teams that here are the better funded sports teams are more successful sport teams. Like unfortunately there's a hand in hand aspect to how much scholarship money you have and how good of athletes you're able to go out and get. Like our basketball program can go out and get I mean, we're competing against other national contenders every year for recruits. We're not having to try to out recruit D3 schools or something like that. You know what I mean? We're going against like the Nova Southwestern or Southeasterns and the West Libs and Cal and, schools like IUP, schools like that. So it's definitely something that, they can go and compete against that. Whereas other programs like our cross country program, they can't, they're asking kids to just come and run cross country for the fun of it, not for any money. So it's just one of those things where it's definitely, we're never going to be able to compete on certain sports because of that. And again, that's where, kind of one of the other questions that I was going to go down was asking you about what impact we do have, but I'll hold off on that one for a second. And I guess that's one of the things too, to kind of bring it back to the coaching aspect of being a strength coach and what our role and value is. From my perspective, I almost sometimes enjoy working with the kids that are here, and that's why I like being at the D2 level. So sometimes more than what I would think being at the D1 level or professional sports for that matter is, there's a little bit more of that, like we're in this for the grittiness and the grind of being a D2 athlete, where some kids are still working part-time jobs, paying for their tuition, and still lifting and conditioning and doing all the sports stuff. So I guess from your perspective, having been at Cal for, again, 17 years, and not to get too far into like your I don't know how I want to say it, like your philosophical beliefs in terms of like your job, but like what do you look at in terms of like why you enjoy being at Cal? Like what is your like why are you so passionate about being a strength coach at Cal 17 years into it?
Yeah, this is a good time to reflect on it, and it's something that I do reflect on each year. It's after the year's gone by and you're completely exhausted, and you've been so busy for the past 9 or 10 months that you haven't had an opportunity to think. And then all of a sudden May hits, half of May, half of June, and you're like, what the hell am I even doing this for? I just got nothing to show for it. It's like cut the grass. You cut it and you could see the result, where this job isn't necessarily like that. And of course, this answer has changed every year. And what I've come up with this year is I love being that support person for the athletes, and, coming to grips with being able to be used and utilized on certain ways, being a person to have and provide answers, being a person to be well-rounded enough to be utilized like as a tool to again, like be on this call. It's like, well, you want to have enough information available and have had enough experiences to provide a certain level of wisdom to help other people keep moving forward. And Christian Conti had come up with the yield theory, which is more or less meeting people where they are as opposed to where you are. And that's the revisitation, is being able to organize those basic thoughts and those basic actions over and over and over. One of my mentors, Jeff Oliver, he's the head coach at the College of the Holy Cross. He was like, man, when you get tired of seeing a squat, it's time to retire. It's time to get out. And I didn't quite get that, but now I'm starting to get it. It's like, it is what it is, man. The principles have yet to change. So I think that for me, just being that tree, being that available person to where when you need me, bro, I'm going to be here and we're going to freaking do this thing, but if you don't, and if you don't want to, the young version of me would get all uptight and I would chase you down, and it's like 10 signs she's just not into you, bro, just like move on.
Yeah, no. And it's going to lead me to another question, but I still get like that sometimes too, where it's like, and I've had this conversation with pretty much everybody that's on this call about like, sometimes it's tough as a strength coach because I feel like sometimes we want to see them in the weight room. We want to see them work hard. We want to see their success sometimes more than the athletes do. And we always have to put that in perspective of like, first of all, the weight room sometimes the last thing they care about. Sometimes winning or losing might be the last things they care about. They just want to be part of a team. Sometimes they don't even want to be that. Like, so we can't let what other people don't want to do or what they do want to do. We can't let that affect what the people that, want to be around us and want to have us kind of make a small impact on them and things like that. And it's definitely tough to do that, especially when you have kids that have a lot of potential. It is very tough. And again, that's probably one of the things that, as I'm into my 10th year of being a strength coach, that's one of the things that I probably still struggle with the most is like, I feel like there's times where I want things more than what the kids do. And we have to realize like, that's that you're fighting an uphill battle. You're never going to win that battle. You're never going to make that kid want something more than what you want, more than what I wanted. And then really maybe just focus our time and energy on the kids that do. Um, so I guess my question with that would be is, obviously we have, just again for everybody that know, our two basketball coaches both played at Cal, both trained under Bobby, Steph, our head coach, and Mickey, our assistant coach. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, one of the reasons that they're the way they are, and that our women's basketball program is as successful as it has become, is because of just their time at Cal. But if you talk to both of them, Bobby, they said that you were two different coaches to them. Steph said that you were mean drill sergeant, had him up at 5 a.m. running, doing Olympic weightlifting, and Mickey said that you were the complete opposite of that. So over your 17 years, like, what do you think's been some of the biggest changes that you've made? Again, doing that self-reflection every year at the end of the year, like, what has been some of the biggest changes that you've made, philosophical, personal, like your principles, what things have changed? How have you gotten from where you were 17 years ago at Cal to where you are now?
I think the annual reflections, the daily reflections, trying to revisit and understand what it is, just like these last two questions. It's like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? What are my plans? Am I looking at this the right way? And I would say what Steph, that's hilarious that they said that. I think what Steph had experienced was, me doing it for different reasons. It was like, hey, these are my expectations, and you're going to succumb to those expectations. Kind of like the golden rule. This is how I see myself, and that's how I'm going to treat you. And she was up front with the brunt of that. As a matter of fact, one of our earliest interactions with Steph and I kicked her out of the weight room. She was giggling, and I was like, get out. Like, there's just no room for that in here. And with Mickey, at that point, I was like, I think there's something beyond the golden rule. And that something is, I'm going to treat you how you expect to be treated instead of me treating you like I want to be treated. And I think that was the time, although I couldn't organize it well enough, but I felt as though I was putting all the energy in, because it's exhausting. Where it's like, bro, this is for you, man. I've got 400 other athletes. I've got tons of paperwork to do. Now I have a family. And it's like, I mean, if you don't want to come in and work and win, I really don't know the next steps for you, other than to have a conversation just like that. Whereas I would be unable to filter that information and speak it, I would act it out. And that's what Steph is. It's like, I'm feeling this thing. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to fricking be a madman, and you're going to be on the back end of that. By the time Mickey came around, I was like, okay, I know how to communicate this. But back then I only knew how to communicate it with my actions. So I keep reflecting on that. And what I've come to find is that our most successful individual athletes and our most successful teams tend to correlate a little bit more when I get out of their way. And not that Steph and her teams weren't successful, because they were. And I don't know that they could have been more successful with me getting out of their way, but I most certainly wasn't the best coach back then. And I think that I like to think that that's continually, to grow in the direction of me understanding what sort of implications I have on an athlete's success. Now, we still push cars and we still do really, really silly things. But I think that I've been able to categorize that and organize that a little bit differently, because again, it's still not me. Like me back then, I would be pushing the car. I would be like, you know what? I'm going to push this car by myself, and I'm going to show you. Where now I'm like, bro, you got to do it. You know what I mean? Like, your ankle hurts. You're going to have to get through it. Like, this is going to be on you, because no matter what, you're going to live and die in this world alone. So the sooner you can come to that, the faster we're going to move on. So I've more or less shifted the responsibility to the athlete instead of assuming it myself, because I was exhausted doing that. Because what Steph saw, I was like that for 400 athletes.
Yeah, and again, that's something that I think I continue to grow to. And Ryan always used to joke whenever I was at pro that I had no like soft skills, and he made me think about. Have you read the book? You probably have, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Like that's one of those where like a lot of times as strength coaches we take the fast thought, like the emotional, like we know kind of that narrow focused thought, and we just blurt out and MF somebody and kick them out of the weight room, versus like having that slow thought of like, okay, maybe this is why they're coming, maybe this is why they're doing this, maybe this is what happened. And again, I struggle. Like I said, that's probably the thing I struggle with the most. And it doesn't mean that I'm probably still not going to throw a football kid out of the weight room at some point this fall. But it's just trying to like, just like you said, just almost get out of their way a little bit, help them as much as we can, but don't try to like do stuff for, like, don't try to like overdo it, I guess is really what it comes down to. Like overdo it in the sense of trying to outthink, like try to get in the head of an 18-year-old, right? And try to outthink an 18-year-old, because they're just not thinking the same things that a 34-year-old is thinking. Like they're just not. And I do agree with the idea of, again, go back to our women's basketball team this year. Like there was never a single time that our women's basketball team that I had to go and like chase anybody down. Like they showed up early. In fact, they'd be out there 20 minutes early waiting on the bleachers to come into the weight room. And like it was every day they were there early. They came in, you never had to yell at them. If anything, what I learned with them is they ended up becoming the most fun team to work with, not only because they were winning, but they just showed up every day and they just were happy and just positive. And like, again, I think the weight room should be the most fun thing that you do every day. And it's not always like that for athletes, but the more as coaches that we can do it, like I think that's really what like the secret of being a strength coach is making the weight room as enjoyable as possible. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's so enjoyable. And like I said, our women's basketball team embraced that more this year than probably any team that we've ever had. And I think it was a reflection of the girls that Steph and Mickey are recruiting, because they're recruiting girls that are similar mindset as what they are. And then just the success that they had and things like that. So I completely agree with you. I guess taking it like back to maybe like a more S&C focus, X's and O's, what kind of, training philosophies, not just the mental side, but more of the training philosophies, um, have maybe changed? What are you doing now that maybe you weren't doing 17 years ago? What were you doing 17 years ago that maybe you're not doing now? Well, I know you're into, a lot of the more like kind of unconventional to an extent things, but I know you also do a lot of the conventional. Like for example, for me, I still have a hard time getting away with, doing bilateral loading. Like I still like back squatting and front squatting and sumo deadlifting, versus where I know some coaches have gotten away from that altogether and doing a lot of like just unilateral squatting and stuff like that. So what are maybe some things that, again, just over your career, even in the last couple of years, I know you guys are doing like is it the suicide squats is what you're calling them, with the bands and things like that. What are some things maybe that have changed, just X's and O's in the weight room the last 15 plus years?
Outside of like a little blip years ago, to where we didn't abandon, I would say, like the primal movement or the compound movements of squat, deadlift, press, etc. There was like a brief period where we thought we knew better, and we went down that route. Maybe 2016, 17. Is when I first learned the FMS. I had like two years under my belt, and I was like, I think I can outthink this. And truth of the matter was, is I couldn't, and you can't. Although you'll see it over and over and over again. People will, you don't need to do any of that stuff, but it's sort of like the yield theory, in that being able to see our athletes, it's like Matthew McConaughey in Dazed and Confused. We keep getting older, they stay the same age. So with that, and going back to Jeff Oliver with the squat never being boring, they're always more or less in the same spot, which is they need to become proficient, just like you're saying, at bilateral movements. They need to get strong. Gosh, it's so true. You're just not strong enough. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, that doesn't mean to say where maybe more I was dogmatic in the past, where I'm like, okay, we can't do any of these things until you get strong. Now I'm like, hey, you're not strong. We could still work on these things in the periphery, those things being, maybe power, explosiveness, potentiation, etc. It was just going to be at a lower level. So I guess I've learned over the years to better grasp onto like a conjugate style with undulation instead of just linear. Maybe I saw things, I'm like, hey, I was so hard. Like if you can't squat 2 times your body weight, you can't move on. And I was so dogmatic about it. Where I still believe in that, but I'm like, I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of seasoning for you. And then we're going to do it and come back to it and do it and come back to it. But to give you a big picture, I agree. Bilateral, and just because I can measure how weak you are, I mean, you're just, for the majority of my audience, they're just simply not strong enough. So the basics is where we live, and try to get novel on the outside.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I forget where I was reading that. It talks about like the unilateral strength training, and it's maybe something that, that kind of mythical being of being strong enough. Like if you're in the NFL, you're probably as strong as you ever need to be because you're already in the NFL. Is it more important for Saquon Barkley to continue to squat 500 pounds, or is it better for him to maybe start going more towards a unilateral loading? And again, it's like for our athletes at this level, I mean, we have kids that literally can't back squat like body weight, like yet. You know what I mean? So again, I'm in the same frame of mind of like there are probably some kids on our football team, on our baseball team, some of our wrestlers like that probably are strong enough to an extent, and we probably need to start maybe finding other things that aren't going to be as wear and tear on them. But yeah, I think for the bulk of our athletes, especially the freshmen, especially the female athletes, because unfortunately they're usually have been underserved in a strength and conditioning capacity. Um, by the time they get here, like I agree. Like I think the bilateral squatting, it just, I don't know. I think there's a lot bilateral squatting and deadlift. I think there's a lot to improve there, and then you kind of transition into some of the unilateral stuff. And just had my meeting with our interns yesterday, and we talked about the fundamental human movements and just how, for me, the biggest thing with the fundamental human movements is it allows us to organize things and just make sure that we're just kind of checking off certain boxes and making sure that we're getting some of the things done that we just feel we need to get done. And I think the other thing too that I was going to ask is, so aside from just your basic strength training stuff, what about from, because I know I mentioned it before with Steph and Mickey, from like a power development, speed development, is there anything that you've done differently? I know you guys have introduced some of the velocity-based stuff there, but in terms of like movements, are you still implementing some Olympic weightlifting stuff? Are you guys doing more med ball stuff, more plyometrics? Like what is maybe stayed the same? What has maybe changed in that regard?
Man, I tell you what, I am just, as I'm sure anyone in this particular field is, you're just a sucker for, research and knowledge. And I think that, like maybe Stephen Covey would say, there are things that are known but not understood. And then maybe a Shane Parrish sort of idea is that, exponential claims require exponential results. So like Olympic movements, I can almost categorize them similarly as in something like a unilateral movement. It's like you make these wonderful claims, but where are the results? Like if the flywheel were that incredible, everyone would ditch weights. Like why would you waste time? So if any of those other things, right, putting them into the same category, were that powerful, everybody would do them. But the truth of the matter is that, like in thinking fast and thinking slow, we get like a little seed planted in our mind, and it grows only in our mind. So as far as those things tend to go, I really think that there is value in Olympic movements. I really think that there's value in accommodating resistance. But to be dogmatic about it is the fail. And that's where I think that currently I'm just seeing things more in a balance of having some sort of conjugate. It's like, yeah, we're going to do them. And as a matter of fact, you might do them and it might make your squat go up because now you have this, incredible determination to squat better, all because of a band, whether it be like the bandit that you sit down into that we started a few years ago, or throwing the bands over the barbell. Now all of a sudden a squat is no longer a squat. And now every third week you're looking forward to it. But the overall, you know, I don't know how much detail you want, but anything that's going to help you to do those things, you know, so we're going to use accommodating resistance, albeit friction with a sled or a band, or although we don't have chains, you know, but we've done some different overloading isometrics and things like that. Staffing is a big thing. You know, if I don't have help, you know, I can't really do that with a group of 20 track kids or whatever it is that I'm working on.
Yeah, and then that's another big factor too. And I guess I didn't ask you this kind of about your guys' setup up there. You know, and it's not as important because you guys probably have it's very similar to what we have here. So everybody that's familiar with what we do here is probably going to be familiar with what you guys have and do up there. You know, and that's the biggest thing is sometimes there's stuff that I would love to do. Like I would love to have our football players have 10 kids all lined up on the football field, like you see at the D1 level, and all be doing sled accelerations. But with the way our weight room and our football fields lay out and how many kids we can train all at one time, like it's just not practical. So we have our little strip of turf and we have maybe 3 or 4 sleds going at the same time. And it's probably not as efficient as what I would love it to be. It's definitely not Instagram worthy, probably like some of the D1s have it, but it's one of those things where, again, it's, you know, sometimes I think about that. I'm like, are we just doing some of this stuff sometimes because everybody else does it? Or are we doing it because we actually know that like it's going to help our athletes? And I'm not just talking about sleds. I'm just saying in general, like there's stuff sometimes. And that's where like, you know, I'm very hesitant to put stuff on social media because I don't want people to think that, you know, the only reason I'm putting it on there is because I think that that is like the only thing that matters. Because the funny thing about it is like 90% of the stuff that it's the, you know, the 80-20 rule or the 90-10 rule or the Pareto principle, whatever it is, like it's like 90% of the stuff, 10% of the stuff we do or 20% of the stuff we do is equals to 80% of the results. Everything else is kind of just fluff. You know what I mean? And what most people are putting out there is just the fluff, the fancy stuff. It's not the back squatting. It's not the front squatting. It's not the lunging, right? It's not the pull-ups. It's the plyometrics and the speed work and the fun, fancy stuff, the flywheel stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I agree with you on that, but I'm with you too. Like it's one of those things where I really try to like also consolidate it now. When I'm talking to my interns, like, you know, we talk about the fundamental humans. And again, I just talked to them yesterday about this, but I almost kind of have whittled training down to even less. I think of things as, you know, if you had to ask me like my philosophy, it's sprint, jump, throw shit. That to me, like that's all the power development you need. And I put Olympic weightlifting into throwing shit because really you're throwing the barbell and catching the barbell. So, you know, it's one of those things we're trying to really simplify stuff. I think as a strength, the older I've gotten as a strength coach, for me, it's like, how can I make this the easiest thing possible for me to learn, for my athletes to learn, for my coaches to learn, and things like that. So this is what we had kind of touched on this a little bit at the beginning, and I want to kind of come back to it. I know it's something that we've been on these conversations in the past with other coaches, and we've had, you know, your guys, you know, conferences up at Cal, and we've talked on it. But again, from your perspective, because I know there's people in here that have a month of S&C experience and a couple years of S&C experience, like what really is our realistic expectations as a strength coach? Like what can we really, you know, hang our hat on? Is it injury mitigation? Is it speed development? Like, is it winning games? Probably not, right? We can get our baseball players as strong as possible. It doesn't mean they're all going to bat 300 plus. So what really should we kind of try to measure our success, our impact? And should we even be worried about that?
If you do, then you're going to have to also accept the negative impact as well on any of those things. So I think ultimately what is in our control is just us. And I think when we impress out onto others in any aspect is going to be, you know, our undogged, consistent ability to be there and to be support for the athletes with whom we're working. I suppose because we all know Steph and Mickey, they saw two different versions of me, but both of the versions were consistently there every single day and every single moment. Like there's just simply not a day that I've missed in 17 years, period. Like it just doesn't happen. And when I'm there, I'm there. You know, I'm not halfway in and halfway out. Like I'm there, I'm ready, I'm prepared, period, every single day. And I think that, and again, that, you know, that's my personal mission statement, like as a human being, is to be a tree by the water, always producing fruit. So I want to be there for my athletes. I want to be there for my family. I want to be there for my friends, period. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And that starts with making a promise to myself and fulfilling that promise. And then once I'm capable of doing that, now I can do that for my athletes. So I know personally, a lot of them don't maybe have that environment for themselves. And this sort of branches off onto a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to where when you have a feeling of love and support, you can grow, right? It's like if you have food and shelter, you can take the next step in growth. And I think what I've seen, at least, in our environment, I think D1's may be different. There's obviously it's different everywhere, but for me being a Cal, that's where I see my role, is being that support, never expecting good or bad, just being there, because again, I mean, someone provides me accolades with a card or stands up in a group of people and mentions my name. 17 years, I don't know, there's 10,000 who aren't saying that. So I have to weigh that appropriately. And just
Yeah.
as well on the other side, it's like, freaking jerk, hey, it's like, well, I mean, if you would know the half of the things that I did, that would be way worse than a jerk. So I think that oftentimes it becomes a revolving door of a profession, is because we place our own expectations on the job itself and what we think we're going to get back, whether it would be a big paycheck or whether it would be everyone praising our name. And I don't think that either one of those things are realistic. Well, especially the paycheck. I know, it takes hard work, man. It's a lot of hours, man. You got to put in the time. And I think you really have to find your niche, your passion. Mine is, being that kind of service person, being that stable force, where others, it might be, researching some aspect of the profession. And in that case, I just stand on everyone else's shoulders and just steal what they do.
Yeah. No, and again, that's something that I think is huge. And I think we've talked about this a little bit as a staff and multiple times. And I will say that I agree with you. I think one of my, I talked about my worst things is sometimes, losing my cool when it's not necessary and it's not probably even beneficial really. But I will say that no matter what, like if I throw a kid out of the weight room, if I see them in the hallway 10 minutes later, hey, how you doing? I try to be the same person every single day. And again, I think that's something that's huge. That goes a long way, especially for young coaches. Like, doesn't matter if you got 4 hours of sleep or 8 hours of sleep, or you failed a test, or you whatever, your girlfriend broke up with you or whatever. Like, you got to be the same person every single day, because that's what these athletes are really relying on. And you mentioned the word service. Well, you mentioned passion, which is like one of my favorite words. And I'm sure, have you heard the Dan John thing where he talked about he kind of talks about the root word of passion being passios, which means to suffer. Have you heard that? Like
I
that's something
love
that
Dan John. Yeah,
I
he's
heard that
amazing.
like yeah, I heard that like 10 years ago, and that's something that like ever since then it's kind of been like my underlying mission statement. It's our mantra at Fairmont with our weight room is Falcon Pride, and the P in pride is passion. Because to me, everything starts with if you're passionate about it, you're willing to suffer and endure and go through things that you might not always want to do. But the other thing that you mentioned was the word service, and that was something that our previous football coach, who I'm sure you might remember, I was not a big, him and I did not get along very well. Our new football coach is awesome and we get along great. But one of the things that
Who
him
is
and
that,
I,
by the way? Sorry, sidebar.
it's Luke Barker. You actually might recognize the name because he went to Charleston. He played at Charleston. Then he was at IUP for a while and was on the staff there. I don't know if you recognize that name or not, but then he was back at Charleston. He was their offensive coordinator last year, and then we just hired him. But he's phenomenal. He's stolen a bunch of guys from Cal and IUP, two successful programs. He's stolen a bunch of the coaches that we have here now. So I'm expecting us to be pretty solid this year. But anyway, one of the things that me and the former football coach would disagree with is he thought I worked for him. And I told him all the time, Coach, I don't work for you. I work for Fairmont State athletes. And that's the thing that you need to realize. And he just never got that. He thought that I was supposed to be kind of his like henchman and punish the guys and, basically just do all this little stuff. And I'm like, Coach, that's the opposite. I was like, I work for the kids as you're supposed to be working for the kids, not for yourselves and not for other people. So, and that's something him and I would never see eye to eye on stuff because of just those philosophical beliefs of, I'm here to work for Fairmont State athletes. He was here to work for Fairmont State football, if that makes sense. And probably more so himself. And again, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. It is what it is. Everybody that knows me knows kind of how I feel about that. But that to me, what you said about that, I think everybody else needs to hear that is like, we're not here because we want to be able to brag about, hey, our athletes And again, not that we shouldn't still measure vertical jump and power output and things like that. Those things are still important. Just for me, for me, it's to validate, like, if we at least the assumption that we're trying to make at least are there more for us. But at the end of the day, like, if I'm going to go brag about my athletes all gain 2 inches in their vertical jump, which sometimes I might, I also need to talk about the kids that lost vertical jump or that got injured or that the teams that were terrible seasons this year. Like, if I'm going to take credit for the women's basketball team this year, then I need to be able to take credit for our men's basketball team, which missed out on the postseason for the first time in like 8 years. So it's one of those things where, we have to be able to balance what those, expectations and outcomes are. I guess kind of on that same kind of train of thought, like, how much do you talk to the sport coaches? Like, how often are you meeting with sport coaches? How much are you, what's your relationship? Like, how is it taking you to grow those relationships? How do you maintain those relationships with the sport coaches? And, without, again, you don't have to throw anybody under the bus, but is there any struggles that you still have with getting them to kind of buy into what you're doing in the weight room? And is that even something that you care about, or should we care about at this level? So what's your kind of thoughts on that with relationship with sport coaches?
Kind of follows the same as the athletes. They were athletes once themselves. And like any of us, unless we explore our own thinking, we think we know a lot more. We think we've experienced a lot more. We think we're tougher than we actually are, and down and down and down. And I think our sport coaches are no different than our athletes in terms of like strength and conditioning. Let's say if you have never had a goal, right? If you never created a plan and executed that plan, how would you have any idea what that takes? And then after a while, after you've done that, if you've not continually done that, why and how would you have matured at all? In this case would be with your person, or let's say emotionally. So if you, for instance, are not aware of your emotional outbursts and you don't have a plan in place and execute that plan, why would you get any better? Why would you get any better at thinking, feeling, if you don't practice it daily? And I say that only to challenge each of us personally, but also to put our coaches in that same category. Like, they're just people. And as a matter of fact, they're just privileged people like all of us. I mean, you don't have to take any special test to be a coach. You need to know somebody, like Chandler, his next move is a Division I. He needs experience at Division I. And once he gets a network of people who know that he's had experience at like, he's no worse or better than any Division I coach. As a matter of fact, I would say Chandler's probably better than the large majority of strength and conditioning coaches at the Division I level. The only thing that's holding it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Freaking incredible. Most of them are knuckleheads only because of their privilege of having maybe played Division I and then just sort of stepping into a role. But I mean, that doesn't make them good. So my point is, our coaches, humans, adults, fall into that same category. So what I think is that I'm closer to becoming aware of that. So I want to treat them in the same way that I treat the athletes, in that, hey, I'm here to serve you. And I'm going to help organize your thinking on how we can both serve our athletes a little bit better. So I tried to be a little bit of a better listener. So for instance, they're like, hey, I need my kids to do, they like fill in any physical characteristic. And I'm like a Dan John. So what you're really saying is this. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm on the same lines as you. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, I don't know. I really want my kids to be conditioned or something. I don't know. It's like, you're not really saying that. What you want them to do is you want them to feel obliged to do whatever it is that you want them to do. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, really, your measurement of running one more sprint, all you're trying to do is to get this, this unicorn of mental toughness kind of thing. But they have no idea.
Yeah.
I think I have an idea, so I'm going to help them organize that.
I actually had the mental toughness and the physical toughness. And again, that's something that I've just completely, went super deep into. Again, especially at our level, we don't have sports psych. I've talked to some of the sports psychs that I know. The person that probably impacted me the most on the mental toughness thing was when I was with the Rockies. We had a head of mental performance is what his title was. He PhD in sports psychology and all that. He was also a Navy SEAL, Green Beret, maybe both, something like that. I mean, he had some military experience. Let's just say that elite military experience. And the thing that he said to me one day when we were talking about it, not just me but to our coaches when we were talking about mental toughness, was he's like, look, you have to remember that number one, it's context specific. That you can take a kid that's a baseball pitcher, you put him in the game, he's going to go to bat, he's going to battle that batter every time. He's going to do whatever he can to get that batter out. You put him in the weight room, you put 135 on the bar. If he's not into it, he's going to look like he's the most mentally weak person there is. But it's context specific. And the other thing that he said to me was, and I think he was a Navy SEAL is why he said this. He said, buds training doesn't make you more mentally tough. He's like, what it does is it gets rid of the people that really aren't passionate enough to go through the physical and mental wear and tear of getting to be a Navy SEAL. He said, so it really just weeds out the people that don't truly want to be a Navy SEAL. It doesn't mean that you're not. He's like, when I was in there, there was some 145-pound nerd that would pass it because their granddad and dad was a Navy SEAL, and they just felt like that was their life mission. Versus there was D1 football players, D1 wrestlers, that couldn't pass the first week. So that really stuck with me in the fact that it's not just about how physically tough you are, how stubborn you can be. It's really finding out what your kind of your why and what your passion is really how you expose how mentally tough somebody is. And again, I've had conversations with a lot of our sport coaches here about that. What's kind of been your process of how you define it? How I do think we can still train it to an extent. How you train it. Is it nature versus nurture? What is your kind of overarching thoughts on mental toughness, physical toughness, and how we can maybe accentuate that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good nuggets of information, that you had just shared. And I was hoping that you were going to touch on passion, because that's, again, that comes back to that suffering. And I think that there's ultimately, there has to be that deeper reason as to why. What I would challenge is the context specific. I think that in the short term that we have our athletes, I think that, yes, it is going to be context specific. And I think that that's going to be interwoven with passion. But as my life continues to go on and challenges continually mount, I think that we have the capabilities of pulling upon certain, plateaus that we have reached. And there is an old Japanese cleansing, which is called misogi, and it's a spiritual cleansing. And if you think about from the Bible to the Tao Te Ching, Native American, in every single culture, this misogi is there. And what it is it's the hero's journey. So basically you leave, you go to the Rockies, you're in this strange place with strange people, and that creates a level of growth within you. Now you come back to family or something familiar, and now you're able to teach these people what you experienced on your journey. And that's more or less the misogi. But with the misogi, it has to be hard as hell, 50-50 chance of you succeeding. That's rule number one. Rule number two is you can't die, right? Because you have to live to tell the story, or to live to grow through it. And I think on certain aspects, we become that misogi for our athletes. I can't tell you how many times, and we've been pushing a car up a road, up a hill, since actually the year that we won the national championship, 2015, with Mickey. She was, I think she was a freshman that year, maybe sophomore, but nonetheless, it was that year. And that was the first time I had this old Nissan pickup truck, and I drove it in, and I was like, oh my gosh, I broke down at the bottom of this hill and it needs to get to the top. You know what I mean? That was the charade that we were playing. And the team came out and they pushed the truck up the hill. And it took every single one of their hands on the truck. This has nothing to do with basketball. Absolutely zero. But man, I tell you what, in the aftermath, the stories, it's I did this thing. I took this journey. I didn't think I could do it. There was a chance that I wasn't going to make it. but I did. And I think that there is spiritual and personal growth there. So we've continued it on every year in different aspects. Sometimes we loaded it with kettlebells, like if the team needed a greater challenge, like if it was a more veteran team who have done it for several years, it's like, hey, we need to make this harder because I need to make it in your mind like there's a chance that you might not complete this. Otherwise, again, there's no growth there. It's sort of like super compensation in the weight room. Like if you're not adding some stress, your body's not going to respond and grow, whether that growth being bigger muscles, stronger muscles, etc. The same thing happens to us spiritually and mentally. Like there has to be stress beyond what it is that you can handle in order for there to be growth. And I think once that's there, I can do anything. Like I just use that same principle and just do anything. I could do anything. Like what, like you, Adam, like what can't you do?
Yeah.
Like what's to say you can't be the absolute best basketball player that you could be? I'm not saying you're LeBron James. I'm saying you can stretch your limits. And that's where we get a little twisted because now we start comparing. It's like, well, I'm not going to be LeBron. It's like, well, of course, nobody is. But you could be the best you can be. So in that case, what can't you accomplish? And the answer is nothing. Are you going to be the best in the world? Well, that's left up to genetics. But why can't you be the best that you could be? And principally, I think that's the carryover. So with us and the athletes, sometimes just showing up on time as an athlete's misogyny. I've got a couple of summer athletes right now, like just for them to show up at 8 a.m. Like we start at 8. They should be here at 7:45. Just for them to show up at 8. I mean, we're not even a full week in and there's already 2 missed days, and I'm like, we got some work to do, baby.
Yeah. No,
Forget working hard. I'm scared. If I treat you like Steph, you're gone. Like you're never coming back again.
Yeah. Well, and that's, we have like a little leadership group with our football team, and we've talked about that. We talked about, another book that I read that I really liked was called The Confident Mind. And it talked about how, like you said, basically you need to have things that are attainable, but are just going to challenge you just that little bit extra than what you thought what you could have done, a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And that book talks about how really mental toughness comes down to, passion, which we talked about, and it comes down to confidence. Like if you have a football team that, you told them, hey, we're going to do 10 sprints for conditioning, and then you throw that 11th one at them because you know that they can do it, but half of them might think that they can't do it, and then they all do it. Well, now you've just kind of like given that little dopamine response of, hey, you did it. So that when the game's on the line, now they're just more confident. They know that they've done some things that, like pushing the truck up the hill. They've done some things that maybe they didn't originally think that they could do. But again, I think with me, that the thought process with that is it has to be something that, like you said, is 50-50. It can't be, there's only a 10% chance that I'm going to do it, because if they're failing so much more than what they're succeeding, which a lot of times is what people think mental toughness training looks like, in my opinion, they make it almost too hard to where you only have 10% of your athletes can pass it. Then I think you're actually at a detriment, versus you want it to be something that's attainable. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, but you want it to be something that's attainable, but also very, very challenging at the same time. That's one of the things where, again, we've talked about this here, is that's why we don't max out. First of all, we don't max out very often just because there's not a great time in the year for it. But I also don't love maxing out all the time, kind of West Side Barbell max effort days, because 50% of our athletes are going to fail 90% of the time. And I want them to leave the weight room every day feeling about all the good things they did, not worried about the one bad missed rep that they did. And that goes back to, again, just enjoying the weight room. But again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fail at times. But I think the whole pushing the truck up the hill analogy, and how it kind of fits into that hero's journey, I completely agree with you. And it's something that, again, it's like, how can we make that as a strength coach? How can we set our athletes up? In my opinion, how can we set them up for more successes than we do failures, so that they get used to overcoming small, attainable goals and obstacles and hurdles and, challenges. My last question for you is, and this kind of, you've already answered this a little bit, but this is actually, I was going to ask you how you're balancing, like, let's just do this. How are you balancing work and family? And again, this is more so for me, and then I'll ask a question that's probably more so for the coaches that are on here. Well, Tyler shorter, also has a young family too. But what's kind of been, the biggest transition for you in terms of balancing that out and making sure that you're, obviously it's probably being present when you're at work, being as present at work as you can, when you're at home, being as present as you can. But what's kind of your biggest advice for young coaches that have young families?
Uh, Compartmentalizing things has most certainly helped. And I think that the majority of people who are in this field and have been for some time, you possess that passion. So you're doing so much work, you're doing so much research, you're doing so much thinking. Like there's zero effort for me to show up today. My last athlete left just about when we started this call. I'm going to stay another hour and do a little bit of work. It's no effort for me at all, which creates a struggle on my family side. So being able to, when I'm at work, I'm at work. And when I'm at home, I'm at home. Because it would be easy for this to bleed over into that. And then on the back end, now all of a sudden my family life's bleeding into this. When you coming home? When are these things happening? So having that ability to apply discipline in those particular areas is huge. And that's, one thing that I pass on to my sons. They're about to be 6 and about to be 4. So we're getting into that stage of development to where we're applying daily rituals. And one of them is just that: be where your feet are. When we eat, we eat. When we play, we play. When we watch TV, we watch TV. It's anything that we're doing, that's what we do. When I'm at work, I'm at work, period. I don't allow anything to blend into those times. And I was a little nervous having a family, because I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to balance these things? And that's it. Like, I take zero work home. I know that's a thing. It's like, well, you can just work from home. I'm like, not me. I will not blend work with my family at all, period. 0% of the time. And that is my best advice. When you do something, do it. And that is it. Have a work computer. Do not put any personal information on it. If you have a phone, which I'm sure you do, don't put any work on it. Make that your personal phone and have a professional sort of outlet that you can go to. And, while it might be a James Clear atomic habit hack sort of thing, it is brilliant because it just separates. It creates this compartmentalization. And for me, it's made me better at my job because now everything's concentrated. And it's also made me a better dad, because when I go home, I'm done. Like I'm done. I'll take calls. Like, you know what I mean? Like if they're emergencies, I'm not like, oh, don't contact me.
Right.
Like, I'm still available, but I'm not openly available. Like, hey, yeah, call me tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'm like, no, like I'm leaving at 12 today. I'll check my email tomorrow morning at 4 when I wake up.
Yeah. No, and again, that's something that I think I do a pretty good job, but I definitely struggle with it at times, especially like during the busiest parts of the semester. Cause there's some days where, I'm sure it's with you, like I'm here so long that like I just don't get a chance to program. So I do all my programming on Saturday mornings, and my wife understands that for about 3 hours on Saturday mornings, like I'm doing all my program for the next week. But then after that, like I'm done all of Saturday afternoon, all of most of Sunday. And then in the evenings, like I could program Monday night or Tuesday night or something like that for the next week, or Friday night. But I like to be able to, when I leave Fairmont State, I listen to a podcast on the way home or something on the way home that kind of gets me out of the strength and conditioning mindset, and something that's like unrelated to strength and conditioning usually. And then when I'm home, I try to be, and I tell our athletes all the time, like, you can call me or message me if it's an emergency, if you need something. Some of my coaches do the same thing, but there's a good chance that if it's after 7:30, 8 o'clock, my phone goes on do not disturb mode, and I'm probably not going to get back to you, especially during the semester. Maybe in the summer a little bit different, but yeah, I think that's something I still struggle with, but definitely agree like that. I see where that's the only way, in my opinion, that's the only way that we can probably make this work, is by being at work when you're at work and being at home when you're at home. One last question for me real quick, and this is for the younger coaches on here. So, I mean, you've had, probably countless, interns, GAs, assistant coaches over the years. What's maybe the biggest thing, your biggest piece of advice for them? Like, what do they need to do? Like, maybe some struggles that you've seen over the years that are consistent or things that have led to most of their success, like commonalities with their successes? Like, what's your biggest, like, elevator speech on how they can be successful, not only in this profession, ideally in this profession, but just in general?
There's a great book Seth Godin has written. It's called Linchpin, and it's all about becoming indispensable. I think we're like the cable bill as strength and conditioning. Like, maybe the NCAA has stated now that we're needed, via a CSCS, but there's always a younger, more hungry person who's going to do it for a whole lot less money than you. Eventually, maybe you're in that position now, maybe you're that hungry person, but eventually you're going to overstay your welcome and you're going to make nice money. And from a university administrative perspective, why do you need to be here? So for me, looking at an intern or graduate assistant or work study, I'm like, why do I need you? Like, I can load these weights myself. I'm totally competent and comfortable doing it. And that's where the indispensability comes in. It's like the iPhone. Like, no one even knew that they wanted an iPhone. Now people need iPhones. And Steve Jobs and those guys at Apple were able to create this interface to where people now need this in their lives. And we possess that same capability. So passing that along to the young people is, if you could figure out a way to become indispensable, like you can create and build this environment to where I didn't even know that I needed you, or anyone for that matter, you got it made. Like, you will walk into anywhere and you will be able to just write your own ticket because I didn't even know that I needed your service. And that is an absolute game changer, whether it be understanding the program, taking a look at the board, let's say, and going into the weight room, getting everything set up. Like, how easy would that make your life? Versus like you coming in, you're like, hey bros, get all these things set up. Imagine like walking into the weight room for a 6 a.m. session and your GA or intern rolled in and has the weight room set up, and all you have to do is cruise in and coach. Could you imagine that? Like, would you be like, bro, I'm going to go to the AD right now and I'm going to ask them to freaking hire you. Like, we need you on this staff. And then just keep going up levels. Imagine doing that for your coaches. Imagine doing that for your AD. Imagine that doing for anybody. And you create this need, like, people need you. And that indispensability is an absolute guarantee that you will always have work in anywhere you go. You see one of your custodians, like, hold the mop bucket for them. I don't know. Like, it will be an absolute life-changing experience for everybody around you.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it's a great spot to end on. If anybody has any other last minute quick questions though for Bobby, go ahead and ask him real quick. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Nothing. All right, Bobby, like I said, appreciate it. I think there was obviously as much kind of mindset, philosophy is whatever you want to call it. Like, as much of that is talked about as there was, probably more of that than X's and O's. And I think at the end of the day, the X's and O's aren't as important as the other stuff. I think who we are, and like you said, who we are and kind of what our passion is and what our value is as a person, what kind of service we provide to our athletes, to our coaches, is more important than the X's and O's. And, and again, that's something, not to kind of toot our horn, but that's something that I say all the time. I tell our athletes, look, everybody squats and everybody benches and everybody deadlifts. It's how we do it. It's why we do it. It's when we do it that matters more. And again, I think that as a coach, like, everybody knows how to coach a squat and all that kind of stuff. It's who we are as a person that matters more. So there's nobody better in terms of that than you. And that's why I appreciate you being on here and appreciate talking to you anytime I can. If any of these guys have questions, guys or girls have questions for you, are you good with them reaching out to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bobby, it's good talking to you. Appreciate it. And like I said, I'll share this recording with you so you can send it to your assistants if you want as well. So good talking to you, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks so much, guys. It was awesome.